you doing, kitty?
She can't go back out for a while. They just sprayed the weed killer out there.
Oh, poor baby. Poor kitty. Unfortunately, you're going to be upset. Kitty. Can I hold you? Okay. I was hoping I could.
October 7th, 2004. The guests on this cruise ship have gathered for their nightly game of Texas Hold'em poker in the ship's casino. Seated at the table is Sally Harper. Sally is a savvy businesswoman and a shrewd poker player. She also loves to win. But while good fortune might be smiling on Sally tonight, her trip will soon be marred by tragedy. A tragic death at sea. Was it an accident? Or is there a murderer on board? Could someone else be next? How many people will die? October 4th, 2004, on board a luxury 5-star cruise ship. It spans 615 feet, with a crew of 130, taking care of 1,712 passengers, all preparing for the trip of a lifetime, traveling from Los Angeles, California to New York City. The LA to New York trip is one of the longest and most luxurious routes a cruise ship could take. And while most ships go from one port to another, this cruise is epic. It goes from Los Angeles to New York, with stops throughout Central America and the Caribbean, in countries like Mexico, Costa Rica, Trinidad, Aruba, and Barbados. This is an expensive, once-in-a-lifetime trip for people who want to enjoy the ocean and explore the best of Central America. One of these passengers is Sally Harper, a 37-year-old sales executive from Hollywood. Sally is a California girl whose life has unfortunately been marked by personal tragedy. Born in Malibu, Sally spends her days as the head cheerleader at high school, but spends her evenings playing poker with her salesman dad and his friends from the car dealership.
So this really instilled almost like a gambler's instinct in Sally, where she's got a really good feeling for when to bluff, how to bluff, that so-called poker face. This is something that you could almost say it's in her blood.
You're gonna make sure your stuff doesn't get taken from you? Okay.
Both were great talkers and great people.
Sally adores her father, and while he spends a lot of nights working, he also dreams about taking her on a big vacation one day. But Sally's father never gets the chance, as he's unfortunately killed in a car crash her senior year. After her father's death, Sally can't afford to go to college, so she gets a job at the same car dealership her father used to work at.
Just like her dad, Sally's very talented with selling, with getting to know people, with forming that quick relationship, and this suits her very well at the car dealership. It's not easy to sell cars, but Sally excels at it, and soon she's the top salesperson at the dealership.
It was great to see her develop skills in sales. Her father would have been so proud.
Sally's success eventually lands her a position as a sales executive at a national beverage and alcohol supply company.
She's at the top of her game, but she's too busy to really socialize or meet anyone.
One of Sally's clients is Tom Bridgewater, a hotel manager who quickly falls in love with this beautiful sales executive.
Sadly, after just a few years of marriage, Tom passes away from complications from diabetes.
Losing her father and her husband. I really don't know how she managed.
Sally's a woman who's in her late 30s and she's lost her parents, she's widowed. She's come to realize that maybe life is too short and she just wants to get out there.
She starts researching cruise vacations, something she always wanted to do with her dad, always wanted to do with her husband, and never got the opportunity. This could be, however, the first step to a new life, a new reality for Sally as she moves past the grieving into a life of her own.
The 21-day cruise would let Sally see Central America and then dock in New York for her to meet with clients, a perfect mix of business and pleasure. But Sally gets excited when she spots the ship's gambling hall on her first day at sea. Sally strides in with confidence, perhaps with the feeling that her father might be watching over her.
One of the attractions on cruise ships is the ability to gamble where you may not be able to closer to home. So Sally likes to play poker, and this cruise ship offers her the ability to do that once they get out of port.
At the Texas Hold'em table, Sally meets the other guests, including Paul Shepard, the 27-year-old personal trainer.
Texas Hold'em is an interesting game because it's based on psychology and strategic betting. You have to try and get inside the other player's mind and guess what they're going to do in order to play what you're going to do next.
As the only woman at the table, Sally immediately draws attention from other players. But Sally knows this seemingly innocent conversation is more about sizing her up as a player and competitor.
Perhaps the other players were underestimating Sally. She's this beautiful woman, they don't know her, she sits down, they think, easy mark, and the tables turn when they start to realize how good a player she really is.
After a couple hours of playing, Sally gets an opportunity to win big.
Sally gets lucky with a pair of queens, and after pushing the other players to bet big, she goes all in. Now they have to match her to stay in the game.
Sally's big bet pays off, and she wins almost $1,000.
Unlike other gamblers, Sally knows when to call it quits, so she leaves the table with a lot of her opponent's money, which of course doesn't make anyone else very happy.
But even with her good fortune, Sally's trip is still a melancholy experience.
There's an old saying that says, wherever you go, there you are. And this is what's happening with Sally. She was hoping that she could escape her sadness by going on this wonderful cruise, but it's still there. Then there's a distraction. She notices a commotion on deck, and she can tell instantly that something is very wrong.
Sally is horrified to see a man drowning in the water. Will the crew be able to react in time to save him? Sally Harper is a California-born sales executive taking the cruise of a lifetime. Traveling from California to New York while making stops in Central America. Sally is a fierce competitor on both the sales floor and the poker table. but her tenacity doesn't make her the most popular person on board the ship. Sally's vacation takes a horse turn when she hears reports that a man has gone overboard. Ship Captain Jim Irvine hears the ship's alarm and orders the engine stop. The crew acts quickly, throwing two lifebuoys overboard and launching a rescue dinghy to try to save them. But as the crew gets closer, the cruise guests are horrified to watch as the man doesn't try to save himself. Instead, his body relaxes as he lets himself float face down in the water. When the crew finally gets to him, they're too late. He's already drowned. The crew recover the man's body, along with a large brown suitcase of his belongings. But when they carry him on board, Sally breaks down in tears. The man is identified as Paul Shepard, the man Sally had developed a friendship with during the cruise.
When Sally's friend Paul turned up dead, it must have devastated her. I don't know how much heartache can one person take.
Remember, Sally's experienced a lot of tragedy in her life, and this is just one more. This was supposed to be her chance to get away from that, and here is another dead man that she knew. So she's devastated.
Captain Irvine orders his crew to check if there's any security footage of what happened to Paul. Meanwhile, he takes Sally into his office to console her and to see if she might have any more information about his death.
Sally tells the captain that she met Paul. He had to tell. Whenever he thought he had a good hand, he would take a sip of his drink. She used this against him during her big win at the end.
But after leaving with the winnings, Paul follows her out of the gambling hall.
Paul flags her down, and at first Sally thinks that he's going to want to win his money now. But he doesn't. He just congratulates her on her great playing and asks her to go out for a drink with him. Well flattered by this young, handsome man's attention, Sally is still grieving the loss of her husband. She's just not ready. But she does say she's happy to make a new friend if he wants to keep her company. And that's just fine.
Sometimes people have natural walls that they build up and they don't connect easily with everyone, but eventually when you find somebody that you have a connection to, it's easy to let your guard down, and sometimes you can find yourself in trouble.
Sally explains to Captain Irvine how her relationship with Paul developed over the days of the cruise. Paul told her that he was a personal trainer and booked his spot on the ship to get away from work for a while.
It's a whirlwind of emotion for poor Sally. Here's this cute, charming man, and he seems to be interested in her. Ordinarily, this would be the dream of a lot of women, to meet someone like that, especially when they have something in common, like they do with their card playing. But in this case, she's still grieving the loss of her husband, and she's just not ready.
Their friendship blossoms slowly over the next week. They start eating meals together, going for walks around the ship, and exploring the different cities the ship docks in. The two also spend time playing some friendly games of poker with the other guests.
While Sally always knows when to call it quits, it's not the same with Paul. Paul seems to be addicted to gambling. As he loses, he gets more and more obsessed with getting his money back. Sadly, as he does, he also drinks more, which impairs the judgment further. Sally wants to say something to him, but they don't know each other well enough yet, so she just goes to bed and leaves him
Ambient
kissing.
temperature 5-9
Sally
degrees.
tells Captain Irvine that the night before Paul's death, she found him in the gambling hall.
By this time, Sally's thinking they're friends. She thinks very warmly of Paul, so she finds him playing what looks to be a casual game of cards with some friends and invites him to dinner. But he snaps at her. She sees a totally different side of his personality. Hurt and offended, she decides to just lead him to his game, and she goes to dinner by herself.
Unfortunately, that was the last time Sally saw Paul alive. Captain Irvine thanks Sally for her testimony, but he'll need more information to try to figure out what Paul was doing from the time he left the gambling hall last night to his going overboard this afternoon. The captain asks Sally if she thinks there'd be any reason for Paul to commit suicide, wondering if he perhaps lost too much money gambling.
She rejects that immediately. He obviously could have afforded this expensive vacation, and the casinos on cruise ships have rules about how much you're allowed to bet. So he was never betting more than he could afford to lose. She really doesn't think that he's the type of person that would throw himself overboard just because he lost a few $100.
Then Captain Irvine asks if she can think of anyone who might have reason to throw Paul overboard. This time, Sally isn't so sure.
Sally tells the captain that she doesn't know of anyone else who would want Paul dead, but on the other hand, she doesn't really know him, and he could have secrets that she's not aware of.
Captain Irvine knows that a man has gone overboard, but he doesn't know why. It's an important distinction, and the difference between a death by misadventure and a murder. Because there's no medical examiner on board, there's no way to tell when Paul's true cause of death occurred. It could be the drowning, or it could be something else in the system. With 2 weeks left in the ship's voyage, Paul's death is a mystery that Captain Irvine is going to have to keep looking at if he's going to solve. But the conversation is interrupted by a crew member who enters with a shocking discovery.
It seems that Paul was keeping secrets all along. Hidden inside his suitcase in his secret compartment is a small handgun and a large quantity of heroin.
When you're getting onto the ship, you and your luggage pass through various levels of security, and your luggage is searched to make sure you're not bringing contraband or weapons onto the boat. This is to ensure the safety of all passengers. Even though you pass through multiple levels of security when boarding a ship, it's not unheard of for a passenger to be able to smuggle something illegal onto the boat.
For Sally and Captain Irvine, the facts surrounding Paul's death just got a lot more complicated. Sally Harper is a sales executive taking the cruise of a lifetime, traveling from California to New York while making stops in Central America. But after the tragic death of her husband, Sally is excited to meet Paul Shepard, a handsome personal trainer. The two hit it off on the poker table, which leads to budding friendship. But sadly, their relationship is also cut short when Sally spots Paul's body recovered from the water after an apparent drowning accident. But things get even more complicated when a crew member discovers a handgun and a large amount of heroin hidden inside Paul's luggage. Captain Irvine is especially angry because guns and narcotics are both illegal aboard cruise ships. This means that Paul somehow managed to get both past ship security.
It would be a horrible thing for someone to be able to smuggle a weapon on a cruise ship because everyone is the proverbial sitting ducks. There's nowhere for them to go. So what if Paul had pulled out this weapon? He would have had a crowd of 1,700 people with nowhere to escape to.
As the person who seems to know Paul the best, Captain Irvine asks Sally if she knows anything about this dangerous side of his personality. But Sally has no idea.
However, even though things look bad for Paul, until the police dusted the bag and the gun for prints, there's no proof that it either belonged to him or that he even knew it was in his suitcase. Since it was hidden inside, someone could have used him as a mule. It could have been a plant.
Captain Irvine decides he needs to question the other people who might have seen where Paul went after the poker game the night before, and asks Sally for some of the people she remembers playing with. One of the players she remembers is Victor D'Angelo.
There's something a bit off about Victor. The captain can't put his finger on it, but there's something about Victor that just gets on his nerves right away, especially when the man expects to smoke a cigar in his office. He's flashy, he's smooth, he's a bit of a high roller. Something is not adding up for the captain.
But Captain Irvine is shocked when Victor confirms that not only was Paul carrying a firearm, but he almost came close to using it.
Victor loves to gamble. In fact, he booked a trip on this cruise ship just because of its casino. He admits that he was one of the people who lost quite a bit of money to Sally, but he doesn't mind. It's all in good fun for him.
Over the course of the trip, Victor notices Sally and Paul's developing relationship. But while Sally is smart enough to leave the poker table early every night, Paul always stays. And while most people don't like to lose, Victor says he could tell that Paul hated to lose.
Just like Sally, Victor also picked up on Paul's habit of drinking more heavily whenever he lost and betting more aggressively.
But Victor tells Captain Irvine that last night was different.
Paul's on this really big losing streak. He's getting more and more stressed out about it. Wants to bet even more, way more than the casino will allow him to do. He's feeling really desperate at this point in time.
Victor tells Captain Irvine that he's a California real estate mogul, so he knows a mark when he sees one.
Victor invites Paul and some of the others back to his own cabin for a game with no holds barred, no limits. The captain is really surprised that Victor would be so open with these revelations, given the fact that it's against the crew's rules. It's a serious offense and could get him thrown off.
With the game moved to Victor's cabin, Paul gets off to a hot start. Unfortunately, this encourages him to get even more aggressive.
Victor can see that Paul's not in a great frame of mind. He's drunk, he's getting tired, he's getting sloppy, he's not in a good mood. So Victor decides to take advantage of that. He starts baiting him. He lets Paul win a few hands just to get his confidence back up. And then he starts playing for real.
It doesn't take long for Victor to start winning, bringing Paul down to just a few chips. Before long, Paul built up a debt of over $10,000. Desperate to win his money back, Paul
Well, that's
announces
all
he
you
wants
got.
to play
You're
one more
out of your
hand
other trees.
for double or nothing.
Victor wisely asks Paul for some collateral to prove that he actually has the money. Paul tries to assure Victor that he's good for it. He says that he can contact these people in Los Angeles that will supposedly wire him the money.
Victor agrees to play one more hand.
Victor explains that at this point in the game, Paul was into him for $20,000. He lost it all in one big hand. Victor said he was starting to feel sorry for the kid and was about to apologize when suddenly Paul explodes and pulls a gun on him. Victor right away notices how dangerous this situation is. Paul is clearly not in his right mind, so he decides that $20,000 really isn't worth dying for, and he lets Paul go.
Thankfully, this seems to relax Paul, who drunkenly stumbles out of the room. Captain Irvine is stunned by Victor's story, and it raises more questions. The captain asks Victor why, if the debt was settled, would Paul decide to jump off the ship the next day.
Victor suggests that perhaps Paul had more psychological issues than just welching on gambling debts.
But Captain Irvine doesn't buy it. If Paul wanted to commit suicide, why wouldn't he use the gun in his room? And what's more, why didn't Victor report that Paul had threatened him with a gun in the first place?
Victor laughs and says, well, I was going to, if I decide to sleep in instead.
Captain Irvine can tell that there's something Victor isn't telling him. Is it possible that it was Victor who lost the card game and took it out on Paul to avoid paying the debt? And why would a personal trainer bring a gun on board along with the cash to be able to gamble tens of thousands of dollars? Combined with the heroin, it's pretty clear that Paul may not be who he says he was, and Victor may be hiding the truth. For Captain Irvine, this case is only just beginning. Sally Harper is on what she hoped would be the vacation of a lifetime, only for her friend Paul Shepard to end up dead of an apparent suicide. Paul's death occurs the morning after an apparent high-stakes poker game, where he lost over $20,000 to Victor D'Angelo, a wealthy California real estate mogul. But something doesn't smell right to Captain Jim Irvine, especially after crew members recover a gun, a large amount of heroin inside Paul's luggage, which was also thrown overboard. As the ship docks in Aruba to give passengers a chance to enjoy the beach, the traumatized Sally stays confined to her room.
Paul's death hit Sally really hard. She's lost too many people in her life. Even though she didn't know Paul that well, he seemed like a nice guy. Or was he? The contents of his suitcase really make her start doubting herself. Was she a good judge of character? How come she didn't get the sense that Paul might be dangerous or hiding something that important?
Captain Irvine knows that he has to figure out how Paul died to make sure there isn't a murderer on board the ship. Shortly after, a crewman comes in with the answer in the form of security footage, revealing the true cause of Paul's death. The captain watches as Paul steps onto the deck, carrying his suitcase. He looks visibly ill, but there's also an odd expression of calm on his face.
Sometimes there's a phenomenon that can happen with people who've decided to end their lives. Since they've made that decision, they become comfortable with it, they've accepted it, they may appear to actually have improved, to be in better spirits or happier, a bit calmer than usual. This is what we might have been seeing with Paul on the CCTV footage.
Paul takes in the view one last time, and then after making sure the coast is clear, he tosses his suitcase overboard. But then, in the moment of truth, Paul gets emotional. Then, he jumps into the water.
Ships have very sophisticated video surveillance systems. So when somebody is seen on surveillance video to commit suicide, the investigation may not have to continue beyond that.
It's disturbing video, but confirms that Paul's death was indeed a suicide, which forces Captain Irvine to consider but then raises a whole list of other questions.
We don't really know much about Paul, who he was, what he was running from, what his demons were. We don't understand why he would have taken his luggage with him if he was prepared to commit suicide. There's just a lot about this case that isn't adding up.
The answer is revealed when Captain Irvine is called to the Los Angeles police to report Paul's death. Thanks to a conversation with a local detective, Captain Irvine learns that Paul Shepard's background isn't as clean as it seems.
The LAPD had been watching him for some time and had discovered that Paul was working with a major organized crime family in Los Angeles.
But Captain Irvine's world is rocked when he learns that one of the leaders of the Pavetti Mafia is none other than Victor D'Angelo.
Victor's not only connected to the crime family that Paul works for, he's one of his bosses. So this would explain why, if Paul didn't know this, he felt comfortable pulling a gun on Victor. It could explain why he wanted to end his own life. This gambling debt isn't going to go away. If anyone was going to kill him over money, it would be someone like Victor. This is really looking more like suicide to Captain Irvine. He realizes that Paul would have been in a very bad state when he woke up that morning, realizing that Victor's probably going to kill him for that money.
But what about the gun? Why would he bring it with him on the trip, along with the heroin and the large amounts of cash? Was Paul planning to sell the drugs along the Central American coast? The money might not have been his to begin with, which means Paul had lost money belonging to a criminal element. That's potentially a death sentence. Captain Irvine realizes that while Victor D'Angelo might not have murdered Paul outright, the fear Paul felt could have been enough for him to end up dead.
One of the difficulties with cruise ships is when a crime occurs, there's really no police on board. So while the captain is doing his best, he's not a trained detective. He's just trying to do what he knows how to do. Short of calling in the FBI and getting them to fly in, there's nothing else he can do until law enforcement arrives. And the captain isn't the type of person to just sit idle. He wants to try and help as much as he can.
cruise ships don't come with a crime lab that would let you test for fingerprints or DNA. Any questions Captain Irvine has will have to wait until they dock 2 weeks later in New York. As a precaution, Captain Irvine decides to shut down the casino for the rest of the cruise. The captain decides to keep talking with the police to see if he can dig up any verifiable connection between Victor and Paul, when suddenly Sally storms into his office.
Sally tells the captain that she overheard Victor and his friends actually laughing about Paul's death and saying he was better off doing it himself. This makes her so upset she just had to leave the room.
Captain Irvine calms Sally down and explains that while his investigation is still ongoing, he does have suspicions that Paul's suicide was prompted or potentially coerced by Victor's ties to the Bavetti Mafia.
When investigators are looking into someone's death, they would frequently look at past relationships and business dealings. So if someone was to have a connection to organized crime, that may definitely come into play in terms of determining why someone took their own life.
Sally is taking this very hard. She's very upset. She demands to know what the captain is going to do about this. Unfortunately, the captain's hands really are tied until they get to New York. He's not law enforcement. He has no authority to arrest Victor. Plus, there's the footage that proves that Paul jumped on his own. Just because Victor and Paul are members of the same crime family is no proof that Victor had anything to do with Paul's death.
Captain Irvine advises Sally to stay away from Victor for the rest of the trip until they can prove any form of foul play. Paul's death will remain classified as a suicide. For Sally, the thought of Paul's death being in vain is one final heartbreak. For Captain Irvine, the case leaves him feeling frustrated and powerless. As the ship stops in Barbados on October 14th, Captain Irvine realizes he hasn't seen Sally outside of her cabin for a couple days. So he decides to send a crew member to check on her and invite her to dinner. Staff member Ryan Norris knocks on Sally's door and at first doesn't get an answer. But then Sally opens the door with a smile, saying she'd be happy to accept the captain's invitation. As the day goes on, Captain Irvine tries to keep the mood light and give passengers the experience they paid for. But as passengers depart and explore Bridgetown, the captain notices Victor and his friends leaving the ship.
Seeing Victor walking free, leaving the ship, gives the captain a bad feeling.
1 hour later, Captain Irvine stops at Sally's cabin, ready to pick her up on the way to the dining hall. But when he knocks on the door, he doesn't get an answer. He finds the door unlocked. Upon entry to Sally's room, the captain is horrified to find her dead on the cabin floor. Sally Harper is enjoying the vacation of a lifetime, only for her friend Paul Shepard to end up dead of an apparent suicide. Victor D'Angelo, a card shark with no ties to the mafia, had beaten Paul at a poker game the night before, leaving him $20,000 in debt to the mob. Sally tells Captain Jim Irvine that she overheard Victor and his friends laughing about Paul's death and saying that it was good he did it himself. A few days later, the ship docks in Barbados, where the captain watches Victor and his friends leave the ship. Then, with just 4 days left in their 21-day voyage, the captain invites Sally for dinner to try to cheer her up, only to find her dead on the cabin floor. It's a tragic end to a lifetime of heartbreak. For Captain Irvine, Sally's death is the last straw in his willingness to play by the rules. He resolves to catch Sally's killer, no matter what. Crew member Ryan Norris arrives to discover what Captain Irvine already knows. Captain Irvine and Ryan can't find any evidence of foul play. Sally's body shows no signs of violence. There's no bruising or marks of any kind. It appears that Sally died of natural causes.
The captain has no evidence as to who or what killed Sally, but he has this instinct, this suspicion, that somehow Victor is involved.
But unfortunately for Captain Irvine, his instincts are too late. All that's left in Victor's cabin is a cigar and a handwritten note.
Thanks for a great time, Victor. And he leaves a single cigar just to rub the captain's nose in it.
It's then that Captain Irvine remembers he saw Victor getting off the ship as they were docked in Barbados. Captain Irvine is furious with himself for letting Victor leave the ship.
There was really nothing he could have done. He didn't have the authority to arrest Victor. There were no charges pending against him.
Captain Irvine knows it's a long shot when he calls the Barbados police to see if they can assist in locating Victor. Since Sally died in Bridgetown, Port, the potential crime is technically in their jurisdiction. Captain Irvine can only hope they might be able to stop Victor from getting on a flight back to the U.S. The Bridgetown police will put out an APB to keep an eye out for Victor.
No matter how upset Captain Irvine is, the show must go on. There's 1,700 passengers that are also waiting for the cruise to continue. So they must set sail, and the mystery of Sally's death and Victor's whereabouts have to be left to the New York authorities.
But then, a glimmer of hope.
Crew member Ryan Norris shows the captain the cigar that Victor left in his room. He points out the logo on it.
Captain Irvine can make out the logo for the El Fuego Casino, which an online search shows is located in Port of Spain, Trinidad. The Angelo docked in Trinidad a day earlier. Could this be a clue as to Victor's whereabouts?
The captain calls the casino. He reaches the floor manager, and although the floor manager is reluctant at first to give Captain Irvine any information, he finally relents and tells the captain that yes, Victor has been at the casino.
But floor manager Javier Gutierrez is hesitant to reveal information about his clientele. Captain Irvine is desperate for information, so he decides it's time to break a rule. He lies to Javier, claiming that he's an American police officer following up on a murder investigation. He tells the story of Sally's death and asks Javier for any assistance he can provide. Javier agrees to help.
Furthermore, it appears that there was a woman from the cruise that was also at the casino around the same time, and the woman sounds an awful lot like Sally.
Javier says Victor was playing high-stakes poker in the high roller room.
It's a $10,000 buy-in just to get into the room. This is serious money.
Which is why it was such a shock when Sally came in, demanding to play one-on-one against Victor.
When I heard Sally went after Victor, I wasn't surprised.
Victor laughs at her at first, but he isn't laughing when Sally suggests raising the buy-in to $50,000 each, amounting to a $100,000 pot for the winner.
Victor agrees to Sally's terms, and the two begin to play. Javier says the game started off very intense. This was not a friendly game. It felt personal.
On the ship, it was all fun and games for Sally. She was having a good time, blowing off steam. But now, at the casino, she's playing to avenge Paul's death. She lures Victor into a trap, letting him gain his confidence, win a few hands, just to see what his tendencies are. But then she goes for the throat.
Within 4 hours, Sally has cleaned Victor out, winning the entire $100,000 pot.
Frequently in a poker game like this, because the stakes are so high and emotions are so high, often these disputes are carried away from the poker table. You would become so angry that you would act out violently.
Instead of just leaving the game this time, Sally's scared for her own safety. So she offers Javier $1,000 to drive her back to the ship. Javier agrees, and during their conversation, this is how he found out who she was. Captain Irvine is stunned by the story. He asks Javier if there's any proof of it, and of course Javier says yes. This is all accounted for in the casino's records.
Captain Irvine thanks Javier for the information, He says he'll be in touch if he can manage to track down Victor.
Though the captain has no proof, he's gotten a sense of Sally and figures that she did all of this to avenge Paul's death. Unfortunately, her desire to honor her father and her deceased husband leads her to go back on the ship and ultimately to her own death.
Believing he has a case, Captain Irvine decides to call the FBI for assistance and start a manhunt for Victor D'Angelo. Jim Irvine is the hard-nosed captain of a cruise ship which has been rocked by two tragic deaths on board its 21-day voyage from California to New York City. But with no background in law enforcement and no clear evidence confirming any crimes, Captain Irvine has been forced to rely on witnesses' testimony to build a case against Victor D'Angelo, a man with known ties to the mafia. Captain Irvine suspects that both deaths were a result of poker games gone awry with Victor, with Paul Shepard jumping to his death in an apparent suicide after heavy losses. Sally beat Victor in a game worth $100,000, only to be found later dead in her cabin. Captain Irvine suspects Victor as the murderer, but figured it out too late, allowing Victor to escape the ship on a tourist stop in Barbados.
Because Sally and Paul were both American citizens, there is no other recourse for the captain than to contact the FBI and get them involved in an investigation.
The FBI can actually come out to the scene and they would take charge of the investigation.
He calls the FBI, he tells them everything he knows, and he says that even though he may not have direct evidence implicating Victor, he has a very strong intuition that Victor is responsible for both deaths.
Thanks to the investigative work and testimony gathered by Captain Irvine, the FBI agreed to look into the whereabouts of Victor D'Angelo.
The best that the captain can hope for is that Victor will turn up at an airport or somewhere else where the cops can nab him before he escapes. But he knows that this is unlikely. Someone with Victor's crime connections and wealth has an easier chance of escape.
In the end, Captain Irvine is forced to let go of the investigation. His responsibility is to the 1,700 other passengers and crew aboard the ship. So he launches out of Barbados and off to New York. Upon their arrival in New York, Captain Irvine guides the FBI through his entire investigation, along with the cabins for Sally Harper, Paul Shepard, and Victor D'Angelo. Captain Irvine also turns over the gun and narcotics found in Paul Shepard's suitcase, as well as the cigar and note left behind by Victor D'Angelo. All evidence points to Victor D'Angelo, but nobody in the FBI or Barbados police can find him. Unfortunately for Captain Irvine, the facts about Sally's death don't give him any further comfort.
The autopsy determined that the victim died of an apparent poisoning. How she was poisoned is unknown at this point. How the person came to ingest the poison becomes the most important piece of information. Did they do it inadvertently? Was it given to them intentionally? That would ultimately determine whether it was a homicide or just an accident.
I'm going to miss her so much, and her life shouldn't have ended this way.
Paul Shepard's death is confirmed to be caused by drowning, but the medical examiner detects overdose-worthy amounts of heroin in his system as well. For Captain Irvine, the tragedy is overwhelming. He's never able to prove that Victor D'Angelo was responsible for the deaths of Paul or Sally. This cruise was the last time Jim Irvine captained a vessel, and he quietly retired in 2005.
At this point, 15 years have gone by and no arrests have been made.
Unfortunately for both Sally Harper and Paul Shepard, justice still eludes them.
the job of detectives to find out who the killer is and how they killed. And often it's forensic evidence which provides the clues.
Each bit of information delivers that to the whole jigsaw.
I was able to test that sample and I got a DNA profile.
There's no doubt at all that forensics were absolutely crucial in this case.
In this series, we shine a light on how cutting-edge forensic techniques in the power of science were able to bring some of our most dangerous and despicable killers to justice.
This was such an unnatural crime.
It's not a question of if he will kill again, it's a question of when.
He believed that he was invincible and that nothing could stop him.
Hear how some of the toughest and most disturbing crimes were solved thanks to the tiniest fragments of evidence.
When you begin a forensic investigation, you don't know what you're going to find.
The officer plunged his hand into loose soil and actually felt cold flesh.
From the type of insects that were around, she'd been dead for at least 5 years.
And how even the most forensically aware of killers couldn't beat the experts and hide their crimes.
If he comes out to heaven help somebody, because he is a dangerous, dangerous man.
In this episode, a brutal massacre following a family wedding leaves 3 dead and communities living in fear.
It was scary to think that he was going to come back to this area. Who knows what he could have done?
A sadistic killer who taunted the police and vowed he would never be caught.
He started writing, telling us that the police were no more than Boy Scouts. They couldn't catch him. He was a master of disguise.
And the vital forensic evidence that would tie the triple murderer to the scene of the crime.
to attend at the door for there being a murder. There was obviously going to be a need for a major incident room to be set up and an investigation to be run from that location. And so I came straight to here. The house itself is just on the left of here, behind a lot of this foliage. It's nothing like it did on the day that I attended when we were called to the incident. You never know what you're going to, so I was always thinking what the logistics of investigating this crime and how we were going to deal with it from this particular location.
In 1983, Detective Chief Inspector Mick Burders was one of South Yorkshire's most experienced detectives. But when he arrived at the scene in Dorr, an affluent suburb on the outskirts of Sheffield, he was greeted with a scene that he had never witnessed before.
When I arrived, there would probably be a sergeant and a couple of officers. And then gradually, scenes of crime officers arrived, and then others came. They would have found a horrendous scene, really, because there were the bodies of 3 people. On the staircase itself, there was the body of Basil, who had been attacked on the stairs. His wife Avril was in the downstairs bedroom, and Richard, the son, he was in one of the bedrooms upstairs. And called for the officers from the Forensic Science Service and from our own crime scene officers to attend and deal with sealing the scene to prevent it from being contaminated by too many feet and too many bodies inside. And we were effectively preserving evidence. One of the things you do when you arrive at a crime scene of this nature is to imagine the route that might have been taken. What implements have been used, what else has happened in that scene itself. So
there's a cat that goes into a physical fitness place, jumps up and turns on the treadmill and then jumps down and starts running on the treadmill. How's that, huh? How often do you see a cat that knows how to turn on the exercise machine and use it? So you think cats are smart?
Oh yeah, but not like that.
When a fourth had been subjected to a sustained sexual assault, but had been spared by the killer. For Mick Burdis and his team of officers, the first task was to discover who the victims were and understand more about them.
Basil Laitner was the senior partner in his own law firm in Sheffield. He was a solicitor and a very well-respected member of the public. His wife Avril was a psychologist who worked with Sheffield Council, a child psychologist, and again had many clients in the Sheffield area and very highly regarded. And Richard, the son who was murdered, was a barrister who worked in London and out of London chambers. And so they were all a very highly respected family and a well-liked family. There'd been a wedding here of the daughter of the Laitner family, and there'd been 200 guests entertained in a marquee that had been erected in the back garden. And in the evening itself, the guests dispersed to the various places, and it was, well, a happy time that was being celebrated by a family.
But what has happened to turn this joyous evening in a leafy city suburb into a bloodbath? As specialist forensic teams searched the scene for vital clues, news of the murders began to spread.
back then, I was a reporter at the Yorkshire Post, based up in Leeds. And I remember on that day, just as routine a day as newsrooms ever are, you get the call, there's something happening in Sheffield, we're not entirely sure what it is just yet, but be ready. Then you find out that there's certainly something major happening in Sheffield. In the car, drive down so that you're on the site. And I came down here with a colleague.
With other journalists arriving from across the country, Alan was sent to work on the story.
They were a prosperous, comfortably off family, living in this really very pleasant house in a very pleasant part of the city. They must have had a pretty enjoyable lifestyle up until that day. And then, bang, suddenly everything changes.
By the morning, Yorkshire would be waking up to news of a multiple murder. News that would stir horrific memories of another notorious killer.
The effect it had on South Yorkshire was remarkable, because you've got to remember again that we were less than 2 years after the arrest of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, who of course was caught here in Sheffield. It seemed to bring a lot of memories flooding back, and overnight women were being protected by menfolk who would insist on picking them up, dropping them off, escorting them to here, taking them there. So there was this almost overnight changing behaviour across the city. You could tell it was happening, and that was a direct result of all these memories, recent memories, being reawakened.
Alan was covering one of the biggest stories of his career. One Nick and his team knew a vicious killer was still at large. The race was on to find evidence that could reveal who they were looking for and where they might be. Sheffield, South Yorkshire, the Steel City, a place that back in the 1980s kept police officers on their toes.
It was a busy industrial city. I knew Sheffield because my grandparents lived there and my mother came from Sheffield. The crimes were mainly what every other city would experience: burglary, assaults. Saturday nights and Friday nights were busy nights, but generally it was the type of crime that you would expect in any conurbation.
By 1983, Sheffield was gripped by rising unemployment as its once mighty steel industry declined. But there remained pockets of affluence untouched by the city's economic woes. One such place was the upper middle-class suburb of Dorr. Only 6 miles from the city centre, its village atmosphere and location on the fringe of the Peak District National Park attracted wealthy professionals.
Dorr's this leafy, pleasant little suburb. It's not the sort of place that news happened.
But it was here, on Dorr Road, that the peace of suburban life was shattered with news of the triple murder of the Lakener family, just hours after a family wedding at their home. Now detectives had the task of finding out who had been in the house and whether any of them had information that could help catch a killer.
And at the wedding there were 200 guests, and there would be many other people involved in the catering and the preparation for the wedding.
While detectives sought statements from guests, crime scene examiners scoured the property for forensic clues. For most police forces in the early 80s, DNA analysis was more science fiction than forensic tool. So the CSI team first relied on an old-fashioned technique: fingerprints.
On the worktop in the kitchen was a bottle of champagne, and we were able to see that there was fingerprints on that bottle, and we needed to identify them. They could easily have been not part of the family, but at the same time they could have been the fingerprints of the killer.
That fingerprint was a vital first clue, but without a digitized national database, it could take days,
was in the fridge, and that cheese had bite marks in it. And we were able to take that cheese and have it examined by a forensic odontologist.
And even in 1983, detectives knew that the indents left in the cheese could reveal who it was. Simon Crew is an expert in forensic odontology.
From analysing the marks in the bits of the food, the odontologist should be able to compose an idea of what sort of teeth arrangements may have made them. So they will identify marks that must have been made by adult teeth. In fact, with the cheese being such a better recording material than the skin that we're used to, you have got a wonderful three-dimensional mark of the passage of the teeth through the cheese. So there's much more information in a bitten piece of cheese than there is in a bruise on skin.
Experts were quickly able to obtain a clear impression of the teeth. This, along with the fingerprint, could put a potential suspect at the scene of the murders. But this forensic evidence wouldn't be of any use until the police had a suspect in custody.
There is no central database of teeth, and there's no magical way of looking anything up. It has to be good old-fashioned detective work. But the police will come up with somebody that they suspect must have made this mark, and then a comparison can be made between the teeth of the suspect and the marks in the food.
So police had two important clues. But there was one more discovery in an upstairs bedroom.
When we searched the house, in the bed itself, we were able to find what appeared to be an imprint of blood, and it appeared to have come through a bandage because you could see the mesh in the way that the blood was imprinted into the sheets of the bed.
In 1983, blood couldn't be simply tested for DNA, but the blood grouping could be determined. Forensic analysis of the bloody sheets would reveal a relatively rare combination of blood groups that only 1 in 50,000 in the UK shared. All this information was fed into the murder incident room. And within 24 hours of being live, detectives hunting the killer received crucial intelligence.
I received a telephone call from a friend who had been one of my detectives in Doncaster years earlier, who was then the detective inspector at Selby Police Station. And he told me that a man that they had charged with the rape of a lady, and that it was very likely the type of crime that he would be involved in.
The man's name was Arthur Hutchinson. He'd been on the run for 3.5 weeks, and he was rapidly becoming the prime suspect. But who was he? Hutchinson had grown up on the tough Alton Manor estate in Hartlepool. As a young man, he already had a bad reputation. But that reputation wasn't confined to the northeast. 78 miles away, in the quaint North Yorkshire town of Skipton, his nephew Dino also knew of his uncle's background.
When I was younger, my dad made me aware that he did have this half-brother Arthur, and he was sort of a bit of a black sheep of the family. He was involved in petty crime, bit of a local hard man.
As is often the case with families, rumours swirled about the outcast member.
It's a story that my Uncle Arthur had a bit of a disagreement with one of his older sisters, and I think he stabbed her in the hand. Whether that sort of tells you anything about the future Arthur, or whether it's just sibling rivalry at its worst, I'm not really sure.
Arthur soon appeared in Skipton, looking for a fresh start. But a row between the brothers and the parent escalated to violence.
It went down, and there was sort of some major altercation. My father demanded that he leave the house, and evicted him. night shift at a local engineering company. He used to travel 5 or 6 miles on his motorbike. Yeah, so this is the bridge where Arthur was waiting that evening to take a pot shot at my dad. You've got a good line of vision here. He obviously pre-planned it. Probably see about 700 metres there, so we would have only been going at 20-25 miles an hour, so we've had time to sort of take in, waiting to get closer. Took a shot. Luckily he missed. I think the father came off his bike. Case of attempted murder, which he was imprisoned for.
Found guilty, he served 5 years, but by September 1983, Arthur Hutchinson was back in the community. A free man with a plan. He'd read an article in the national news about a woman in Selby who had come into some money, and he decided to pay her a visit.
He had this ability to believe that he would be overbearingly attractive to these ladies, and that every lady that he met would want to sleep with him and be with him. And he was convinced that he would be able to persuade this woman to marry him and set up life together.
But Hutchinson wasn't a hopeless romantic. Before executing his plan, he stopped outside the house, lurked in the distance, and watched.
When he was watching the house, he saw that this lady had a boyfriend. And so he decided that he would dig 2 graves in a field near to the house.
Hutchinson's murderous plan never came to fruition. The boyfriend left, but Hutchinson broke into the house and raped the woman. Incredibly, the next morning, she talked her way out of Hutchinson's clutches and raised the alarm. Once again, he was facing a lengthy prison sentence. However, this cunning criminal was determined to avoid another spell inside at any cost.
Now the courtroom at Selby was immediately above the police station, and it was being decorated. And on the day that he was due to appear in court, he was going to be moved from the cell area to an office in the building which was going to be used as a temporary court. But unfortunately, he managed to find the staircase that led from the cell area of the police station up into the dock of the court. And when he climbed up these stairs, he found that there were decorators and scaffolding, and he was able to escape from the dock and crashed through a big window and landed on some barbed wire and then over into a field at the side of a railway line.
It was the classic escape that you don't want to go to the toilet, and they put him in the toilet and he escapes through the back window. You know, you couldn't have made that up, really.
Hutchinson, injured from the fall from the courtroom window, had escaped and was on the loose. His leg was lacerated, his trousers ripped. But Sheffield was more than 60 miles from Selby. Could it really be him who had made his way to Door Road and killed the Ligners? And if so, why?
I know.
In 1983, police in South Yorkshire were investigating the brutal and apparently random murder of the Ligner family. The 3 victims had been stabbed to death in their own home after celebrating a family wedding. One of them had been left clinging to life. Detectives
And then give her that dry food in the baggie that's on the counter.
fingerprint on a champagne bottle.
It's in a plastic bag. Yeah, I've been doing that.
They've got a match. A known offender, Arthur Hutchinson. But it wasn't just the fingerprints that pointed to Arthur. The surviving victim, in the care of a hospital, spoke to police, and despite the harrowing experience, was able to tell detectives what she knew.
She'd had such a traumatic experience of being handcuffed, the physical and the sexual assault on her, and she'd been handcuffed overnight, and she'd had to climb over her father's body to get down the stairs. So we had to be very, very conscious of the difficulty that she was having mentally as well as physically. And we assigned one of our female detectives to work with her, to be very close to her. And this was long before the days of family liaison officers, but it was the obvious thing to do.
Remarkably, she was able to provide a sketch artist with a detailed description of her attacker.
That was almost as lifelike as a photograph, probably better even than a photograph, because it had detail in it. It was really, really lifelike. It was an amazing picture, and we were very, very successful and very, very fortunate to have that sort of picture to put as part of our investigation process.
That picture was released, and they named him as the prime suspect, indeed the only suspect, with the usual warning not to approach him. If you see him, or if you know anything, call us. Call it in. Don't approach him.
It was the community in Yorkshire that Mick wanted to speak to most of all. Arthur Hutchinson was on the run, and chances are he was still in the county.
Good to see you again after all this time. Yeah.
And he turned to then Yorkshire Post journalist Alan for help.
It was a strange inquiry. It was different to any of the other inquiries I'd ever done.
Well, there was that urgency, wasn't there? And the fact that you named him early on, you were so confident that you got the right man.
Well, we knew we'd got the right man because of the incident that happened in Selby and the escape from the Selby courtroom. So we knew we were onto the right man.
You know, he's out there, he's on the loose.
That's right.
Nobody's any idea what he might do.
No, quite. Of course, when we published his name, that really brought us major problems because we got such a huge response. Hundreds of calls and hundreds of letters that we got into the incident room telling us that they'd actually seen him or thought they'd seen him. I mean, many of them were genuine.
It's the critter!
Some were not necessarily genuine.
Hello, critter.
They caused a bit of problem, but in the main, it was quite remarkable the number of calls we got. Yeah.
I think the other big standout from this one was just the sheer, evilness of it.
Phone calls did start coming into Mick's incident room. People who thought they'd seen Arthur Hutchinson all across the north of England.
I think we were all, police, journalists, everybody involved really, we were all sort of on tenterhooks, waiting, half expecting there to be a call to say, they found a body.
Did that feel good?
There's been an incident.
It did.
X town or, Y place. I think one of the big police concerns while he was on the run about what his state of mind was and what he might do out of a sense of desperation.
Arthur Hutchinson had vanished, and his days on the run turned into weeks. And time was making him more confident, even posing the officers chasing him in a letter to the Yorkshire Post.
He started writing, telling us that the police were no more than Boy Scouts. They couldn't catch him.
Yeah, that
he was a master of disguise, that was another phrase he used. And he walked past the police several times, disguised, and they never spotted him, and they were never going to catch him. It was all this taunting, I'm the master, I'm invincible, sort of stuff. And he also created this identity for himself of the fox. For us, this was great, because, as a journalist, normally, you sit at the end of the police table a bit like the family dog waiting to be tossed a few scraps of information, to keep you going for tomorrow morning's paper. And, we were on tenterhooks now. We were waiting for the postman to arrive every morning because we were wondering, would there be another letter from Arthur Hutchinson?
In fact, the letters from Arthur Hutchinson to the Yorkshire Post made this a unique investigation.
And from a journalist point of view, that was just great because, we got to open the letters before you'd even seen them. So by the time you got your hands on them, we knew what was in them.
Yeah.
And that's not the way it normally works. system where the police tell us what you want us to know. But this time, we got full access. It was great.
You're right. I think to remember we sent a motorcycle run out to collect the letters.
Yeah.
It was quite a unique experience really to see these letters and to understand them. And of course, because he was on the run, we didn't know where he was.
Those letters gave little away to the detectives in the incident room. They analysed the postmarks, attempted to learn where they'd been sent from, but it didn't lead them to his hideout. Detectives knew that Hutchinson may stop at nothing, and as the manhunt dragged on, fear was growing.
My dad was aware that he'd tried to kill him once, and the police were aware of this, so they sent 2 policemen around to our house. And for several weeks while Arthur was on the run, we had 2 policemen sitting down watching TV with us and sharing dinners. It was quite shocking that it was my half-uncle that was responsible for this terrible crime.
While police in Skipton were on high alert, soon reports emerged of Hutchinson being seen in various towns and cities.
He was actually covering a lot of ground, and we know that he was in Barnsley, he was in 2 or 3 places in North Nottinghamshire, in guest houses and the like, in Manchester, in York, and in Scarborough. So, he was crisscrossing almost the whole of the north of England. He was certainly stealing food. He was certainly moving around. His own account is that he slept during the day and moved at night, just trying to stay one step ahead of the... And of course the police were becoming increasingly anxious to get him back under lock and key.
He boasted about being able to live off the land and eat dandelions, but he could eat plenty of other things besides dandelions, and I'm sure that he got good rich pickings from some of these places. After all, he was on the run for quite a long time, and he was able to avoid arrest, even to communicate with newspapers about what he was doing.
UP sector milepost 347.0. No defects. No defects. Total axle 294. Train
Hutchinson was writing
1
letters. He
mph.
must know they'd
Ambient
been printed,
temperature
and that
6.4
must mean
degrees.
he was reading
UP
a
sector
newspaper.
out.
If the police could get a story printed that could lure Arthur in a certain direction, it could help them catch him.
We had connections with his family, and we were able to discuss these issues with his mother and his family. His mother was not a well person and was due to have some hospital treatment for a heart condition, and she was agreeable that we should arrest Hutchinson as quickly as we could.
Detectives suspected that a story about Hutchinson's ailing mother would have the desired effect of flushing the fugitive out.
They knew that when he latched onto this story, he would be in his way home. He had a strong bond with his mother. Perhaps because she was the one who always stood by him. Most of the rest of his family by this stage had completely disowned him. They wanted no more of Arthur Hutchinson. We didn't realise at the time quite how good, how brilliant the police operation was. So he began making his way back to Hartlepool, where she was living, and slowly but surely the net tightened.
While detectives set their trap for residents living on the Outer Manor estate, the prospect of Arthur Hutchinson returning to his native northeast was something that filled many with dread. Tracy Mitchell was a teenager in the 80s and had regularly come into contact with Hutchinson.
Me and my mum would walk down this way and go through this alleyway, go in the shop, and then we'd come out, and Arthur Hutchinson always seemed to be laughing about and always used to come over talking, and it used to make me feel really uncomfortable. He'd be smiling, but his eyes weren't she? I just didn't like his eyes. It might sound strange, but that's just how I felt like. It made me uncomfortable.
According to Tracy, Hutchinson once threatened and then chased her and her friends. A terrifying experience for the then 13-year-old girl.
The older you get, the more you think what could have happened if you caught it at the time. It was scary then, but more so I think now because you understand more what he could have done to you because he's obviously capable of it.
With every day, Hutchinson remained at large. Tension on the estate grew.
There was a sense of fear when he was on the run now he would come back because a lot of people thought he would come back to see his mum because he was very close to his mum, I think. And who knows what he could have done.
With communities across northern England gripped by fear, police officers from across the north were also making their way to Hartlepool, where they were sure Hutchinson would soon arrive. But would he fall for the bait, or did he have one final flourish up his sleeve? In November 1983, police from South Yorkshire were closing in on the man suspected of murdering 3 members of the same family in a brutal attack. Arthur Hutchinson had labelled himself the Fox after going to ground following the savage stabbings of the Lakener family in Dorr, near Sheffield. Detectives had tracked him to the Midlands, Manchester and Yorkshire. Now they were preparing to close in on the killer after concocting a plan to lure him back to his hometown of Hartlepool.
Were able to set up a trap to try and catch him. We knew that Hutchinson was making his way into the area.
But while Nick and his detectives finalised plans to ensnare a box, a farm near Hartlepool was already picking up suspicious activity.
We have a sensor that crosses the farm lane, that if that sensor's broken, then there's a blink that goes off in my parents' bedroom. And this sensor started to go off at the same time every morning.
Claire Layton remembers the mystery over what was causing the alarm to sound.
So it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and when it had happened a few days in a row, my father set his alarm so that he was awake, ready for the sensor going off. And when he looked out of the window as the sensor went off, he saw the silhouette of a man walking briskly. So he was dressed in camouflage type clothing, the green colour, and because he was walking away, he couldn't see his face. But he was just walking briskly up our lane. So of course we put 2 and 2 together and we thought, oh, is that connected?
Just a couple of days later, her farm would be the centre of a massive nationwide manhunt.
So the first thing I remember is being woken up by the police at 6 o'clock in the morning. They knocked on the front door to ask us to stay locked in the farmhouse and to ask my dad permission to search the farm. When I looked out the window, all I could see was this line of police, and if you go beyond this grass field and into the cornfield beyond, and you just look across the horizon, you've got from the trees on that side right across to the large tree in the middle over there.
Hi. I combed her fur. There were a few fleas, but not very many.
UP detector milepost 347.0.
you don't like the towel I put there in place of your coat.
Oh.
UP detector
You
milepost
don't.
347.0. No defects. No defects. Total axles 4.2. Train speed 2.0. MPH. Ambient temperature 6.5 degrees. UP detector out.
Apparently a Delta plane flipped over on his back. Did you hear about that? Yeah. Delta plane flipped over on his back on landing in Toronto. Nobody's dead yet. Somebody's critical though. Just flipped over.
On takeover?
No, on landing.
Well.
Yeah, it just. Being completely investigated, obviously, but apparently there have been gusts up to 70 miles an hour in that area. So, no, maybe it got hit with one and it flopped it over. What the heck of a landing.
think about it, man. You shoot me. Who are you gonna pin this shit on? You wouldn't pin it on Indy. Sweet, harmless Indy wouldn't hurt a fly. And of course, there's Elliot. But even a dog like you wouldn't hang his only best mate out to dry like that. What about Hallie? Because if I'm gone, and you're not pinning this on the other two, then it's got to be Hallie. You let Hallie take it for you, wouldn't you?
Somebody was saying Delta's been having a bad few press weeks. The Blackhawk slams into one of their aircraft, and now this happens. Of course, both of them, they weren't technically Delta flights, but still. They're just Delta aircraft. It's still, Delta's not having a very good time. Or Delta. Delta's having the worst press time this year so far.
their life in the hands of others.
We are not looking for predators among this population. We know that nurses are supposed to be healing patients. Instead, this is power to kill them. The nurse was like a shadow in the corner.
The angel of death, Charles Cope, killed dozens and dozens of sick patients.
Very few healthcare serial killers actually have mercy as their motive. This was a man who had long lost his life. He felt as if he had been betrayed by the hospital system. Charles Cullen exploited trust that is part of the healthcare industry in order to carry out crimes. Charles Cullen, you stole the last years of my father's life.
This individual has escaped authorities for 17 years. Charles Cullen is probably one of the most prolific serial killers the world has ever known. But when you start looking at why he did this, that's when the case gets really complex. Secret.
Yes, I am calling from Somerset Medical Center. We're trying to investigate a toxic that occurred in a patient in our critical care unit. This person is admitted to ditch toxicity and actually expired. His ditch jumped from 1.33 to 9.61 in a day, which is kind of unusual.
How does this to the police matter? We have reported to the police. This is a huge issue.
In 2003, I was contacted by Somerset Medical Center. My name is Tim Braun. He's one of the lead detectives in the Charles Cullen investigation. Somerset asked me to investigate the death of a patient that did occur in their facility.
In June of 2003, Florian Gall went to the Somerset Medical Center critical care unit. He was a Catholic Church official who was in his 70s. My name is John Mulville, and I was one of the lead reporters covering the Charles Cullen case for the Associated Press. Florian was on a breathing machine, now treated his pneumonia. He was on the road to recovery and discharge after his terrible illness. But on June 28, 2003, we were told he was in cardiac arrest. He died.
Because he did not have any type of heart issues. It was unusual, which rose suspicion within the hospital administration to look into these matters.
An autopsy was conducted. It turned out his Jackson levels were off the chart.
Digoxin is a drug that can either save your life or end it.
My name is Dr. Harry Millman, and I'm a toxicologist.
Digoxin is used primarily in patients who suffer from congestive heart failure. When you give too much of digoxin, the heart will be doing a lot of extra work. And as a result, you're going to have a heart attack.
Gall's death was a big problem for Somerset Medical Center. This was not the first digoxin overdose.
Somerset Medical Center had been conducting an internal investigation for several months. They were in particular looking into 5 suspicious occurrences. 3 of the patients had abnormal levels of insulin in their system. And in 2 other cases, there were indication of extreme high levels of adjournancy.
After 5 suspicious deaths, Somerset medical officials fear a dark pattern is emerging. And so they call on the police department to investigate.
Our investigative team were summoned to a meeting that took place
in the conference room at Somerset Medical Center. At that early stage, we weren't quite sure if this was an intentional act by an individual or some sort of medical mystery type of case. We did investigate nursing staff on the critical care unit where all these events were occurring. We recognized that a nurse named Charles Cohen was not at any one hospital for any long period of time.
Charles worked as a nurse for 16 years at 8 different hospitals between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And that alone raised suspicions. I'm Dr. Casey Jordan, a criminologist who specializes in the study of violent crime, including healthcare serial killers.
So, we began to focus on Cullen actually quite early. When mentioning Charles Cullen's name, the hospital did emphasize that he did not appear to have any type of direct involvement in the case. Cullen related well to people he worked with. I mean, he sort of seemed like an underdog to interview with.
Charles Cullen was born and raised in West Orange, New Jersey, which was economically challenged. But Dr. Catherine Grant, an expert on serial murder, and I wrote a book about healthcare serial killers. Cullen was a late life child in an Irish Catholic family with 8 brothers and sisters.
When Charles was only 7 months old, his father died, and his mother had to raise him on her own.
His mother had to do part-time sewing jobs, and so he came essentially from a little disadvantaged place.
Cullen describes his childhood as miserable as a family member. His siblings were much older. They weren't a huge part of his life all the time.
Into this house came all kinds of people, his brothers and sisters, men in and out, were strangers, and dangerous. There was an abusive boyfriend, sisters, and he was high school, that guy was abundant. So we already know that as a kid, he didn't have any hesitation going over the line morally to hurt somebody.
Cullen attempted suicide several times, including once when he was just 9 years old when he drank chemicals from a chemistry set.
He was obviously a very troubled child, but the worst thing to ever happen to him occurred when he was a teenager. When Charles was in high school, his mother was in an accident and died. He was devastated, but also angry because when he got the call from the hospital, they at first didn't tell him that his mother was dead, giving him some hope that she would recover, and then find out not only is he dead, but the body was taken away. So he found that he was betrayed by the hospital system. This was a turning point for Charles. He became very angry and lost. His father had died before he ever even had a memory of him. His mother died in a horrific car accident. This would leave anyone angry, but for Charles, he was very angry at God. Why was he suffering so much loss?
After his mother died, he dropped out of high school.
Cullen didn't really know what he was going to do with his life because of all the loss he had experienced. He felt out of control, helpless, and seeking power. He wanted to reassert power. So he went to a nursing school.
Coming up, Charles Cullen murdered my mother. You blind and stay in the medical profession. The victim's families come face to face with the killer himself.
I want you to die tomorrow because you know what? There ain't no good gonna help me.
In October 2003, Somerset Medical Center is the last stop on Nurse Charles Cullen's killing spree. And the first time investigators finally get involved in the case. But with no real evidence against him, detectives dig deeper into his personal life.
His father had died before he ever even had a memory of him. His mother died with a car accident. He said it was the loss he had experienced.
Colin felt out of control, helpless, and disempowered. He wanted to reassert power. So he went into a nursing school.
While Colin was in nursing school, he worked several jobs. One in a restaurant. The only thing he liked about the job was his boss there, Adrian. Colin and Adrian had a fast courtship. They were engaged after only about 6 months. They were married shortly after he finished nursing school in 1987. 1988. Colin's first daughter was born.
This had all kinds of life-changing distress that he just wasn't prepared for.
He developed a serious problem with alcoholism. He became a secret alcoholic just to endure the life that he had chosen, that he hated. He would tell his wife he wasn't drinking when he was.
At the same time, Colin earned his first nursing job at St. Barnabas Hospital. A few months after Colin's first child, 72-year-old John Yanko was admitted to St. Barnabas Medical Center. John Yanko is a father of 4 and a retired municipal court judge. He enters the hospital after some medication triggers an allergic reaction. He had a healthy heart.
Charles Cullen was on duty, and Yango was expected to make a full recovery. But instead, he died. In 1988, this was the first suspicious death under Cullen's care. The hospital just assumed that Yango died of an allergic reaction. But after a toxicology report came back, they found that he had an unusually high level of insulin in his blood.
We found out that at the time Colin was working there at St. Barnabas Medical Center had quite an extensive internal investigation looking into several suspicious overdoses and deaths that did occur in their facility. And furthermore, Colin was the primary target of their internal investigation. Every time there was a suspicious death, it turned out Colin was working. We found that information to be quite valuable. It rose further suspicion. The hospital let him go without proper notification to law enforcement and other agencies. Now on Colin's trail, investigators questioned the person closest to him during his 5 years at St. Barnabas. During the course of our investigation, I actually spoke to his wife. It did not appear as though she was surprised by our looking into his suspicious activity. She was aware of the internal investigation at St. Barnabas, and she did express that the marital relationship was quite strained. She did provide us a broader picture of the person we were looking at.
He was not really cut out to be a husband or a father.
He was neglectful of the children, leaving them alone when he was young.
And then his wife began to get nervous when neighbor's dog wandered into the property. And the dog ended up getting poisoned. And she was afraid it was her husband who had done it. And if you could poison a dog, could you do that to them? The things that are risky in Colin's life are the depression, the substance abuse, the manipulation, the lies, the secretiveness. You don't necessarily say he's going to commit a crime or will become a killer, but these are all warning signs of somebody that was really truly a psychopath. And that's exactly what happened.
Terrified of her husband, Adrian divorces Charles Cullen in 1992.
And at the same time, he starts a new job at Warren Hospital in New Jersey.
Warren Hospital is the second hospital that Cullen is employed by. Because the record doesn't reflect any wrongdoings, administrators are not wiser about his brutal past.
At this juncture, investigators are once again stunned at what they discover. They realize that after his wife filed divorce papers, 2 elderly women suspiciously died of digoxin overdoses at Warren Hospital.
Detectives are now beginning to see a pattern between negative events in Cullen's personal life and suspicious deaths that have occurred. In 1993, 91-year-old Helen Dean is recovering well following breast cancer surgery. Her son was by her side throughout her treatment. One day, Cullen asked the son, Larry Dean, to leave the room. He did. When he returned, his mother said that the nurse had stuck her. A day later, she was dead. Larry Dean was convinced that Cullen had murdered his mother.
Anyone who's been a patient in a large hospital knows that people come in and out constantly. A healthier serial killer will take advantage of that because they can easily enter a room and do whatever they want. Usually, patients just passively take the care they're given.
The hospital authorities suspected a drug overdose, and so they tested her biological fluids for 100 different drugs.
But with the toxicology exam, they did not specifically look for the drugs, which ultimately was his drug of choice for this deed.
But Charles Cullen is once again the main focus of the investigation. Warren Hospital questioned Cullen about Dean's death. He denied that he'd done anything.
They even gave him polygraph tests, which he passed. And that actually is not uncommon for serial killers. They have this pall of denial in the interest of self-preservation.
They were able to give him any deaths, so they allowed him to resign.
When he gets away with it, now he will develop this sense of narcissistic immunity that, wow, I can do this, I have the power to do this, and they can't touch me.
Charles Cullen is probably one of the most prolific serial killers the world has ever known. But when you start looking up why he did this, that's when the case gets really perplexing.
By 2003, Charles Cullen is a person of interest for mysterious deaths across 8 different hospitals. Police still have no evidence to connect him with the murders, but after investigating his background, they've uncovered an unlikely pattern that pushes their suspicions over the edge.
The police have such a high correlation between when his life went downhill and he was depressed and somebody died.
When his family life crumbled, Cullen didn't know how to cope. So anytime there was something going wrong in Charles Cullen's life, a patient died.
This pattern becomes more and more evident. And one of the investigators are going from hospital to hospital, tracking all of these mysterious deaths. After Charles Cullen left Warren Hospital, he moved on to Huntington Hospital in Flemington, New Jersey. Detectives figured now that he was divorced from his wife, he started dating a nurse in his workplace. And there he had everybody fooled, including his girlfriend. They thought he was highly competent, extremely hard worker, and as far as we know, during that time frame, there were no suspicious deaths.
A little over a year later, that all changes when his life goes into upheaval.
In early 1996, Cullen's relationship with the nurse was on the rocks.
He is a controlling person. He's out feeling helpless. So he's looking for ways to restore his sense of power and control over his life.
That's when he started killing again at Huntington Medical Center. By July, there were 5 unexplained digoxin overdoses at Huntington Medical Center.
He was allowed to move on to another facility.
Cullen knew that he could beat the system. He would leave a job when somebody was on to him. And he was always allowed to find another job.
The more these hospitals
dig, the more that they can stitch together that this could be the work of one of their employees.
Having investigated Cullen's career at the Hunterdon Medical Center, detectives are certain he's the person responsible for the deaths. But now they have to find physical proof in order to arrest him. They follow Cullen's trail to the 5th medical facility he moves to, Easton Hospital in Pennsylvania.
In 1998, after Cullen had started working at Easton Hospital, he apparently had run into financial troubles. That was the year he filed for bankruptcy. And all of a sudden, patients started mysteriously dying at Easton Hospital.
When we look at Cullen's timeline, you can actually see when something bad happens, within a week or two, someone died. It's pretty clear that when things are failing in his life, when he's feeling disempowered, killing patients becomes much more in place of solace and releasing his feelings of stress and also empowering himself. So it becomes more frequent the more his life fails.
My father was a wonderful guy. We had lots of happy memories growing up at my house. My sister and I and my father played in the trombone choir in church. My father loved the church, and he taught us to love each other and treat each other with respect. I'm Christina Toads, and my father was Anna Marshram, the patient at Easton Hospital. My father was transported to Easton Hospital on December 29th, 1998, because he was having seizures. In the emergency room, the nurse was kind of like a shadow in the corner. He just was standing there with his syringe and just watching us. At that point, I asked him what that was for, and he said it was in case my father's heart stopped. But I didn't think anything about it because I just wouldn't assume that anyone would want to hurt my dad. We expected my father to survive for sure, but he didn't seem to be recovering quickly enough. And then somebody ordered a blood test, and he had been given an overdose of digoxin, which was a medication he should not have been given. My father was given 4 times the legal amount. I actually got a phone call from my father's doctor, and he said, Chris, nobody would give him this drug here. It's not prescribed. He said, I don't know who gave him this drug. And then my dad passed away within another day. He never really came out of it. That's a night I'll never forget. I just miss being with him. I miss all the time we had. I feel like there's a part of my life that we didn't have and never will have. So.
Consensually resigns from yet another hospital, and in 2002 begins working at Somerset Medical Center, his 8th and final hospital.
In 2001, Cullen's brother died of brain cancer. In the year that followed, a lot more patients died at his center. That's when I finally caught up with him.
As we are gathering all of this various information from the different healthcare facilities, personal background, it became obviously clear that we were looking at a serial killer.
Authorities realized that he could have been responsible for up to 400 deaths.
And that we had to stop him before he could murder any other victims. In 2003, investigators are determined to apprehend Charles Cullen, but they still don't have a concrete connection to the deaths. They take a new approach and turn to the one person close enough to him for help. Fellow critical care nurse Amy Loughran.
Amy is a nurse who was a very good friend of Charles Cullen and often worked on the same shift. She gave him high accolades for his abilities. So when police approached her and said, we
scene to do. And has to be activated by a nurse with an ID, along with the drug that is being requested.
The computer has a log every time it's in use, so the detectives were able to access Colin's activity. What they found was a lot of digoxin being dispensed.
The police then showed Amy and Charles pick this activity. Amy took one look at that printout, and she knew. He would put in an order for digoxin and then cancel it, and then claim it was just a mistake. But there were so many mistakes. He also requested drugs that shared the same drawer with digoxin. The inventory was never getting counted, and the machine just kept getting refilled.
Instantly saw a pattern. She said, "It's killing me."
This wasn't just a coincidence or a few mistakes. This was murder.
At that point, Amy agreed to help further our investigation by offering her assistance. What we came up with was a plan to lure Colin to go to dinner with Amy, and at the same time wear a body wire. Amy Lawford agrees to help detectives get a confession out of Colin.
After ordering, she looks him in the eye and she says, "I know you killed those people." But he says, "I'm not going down without a fight." It's not really an admission of guilt or a confession, but it was enough that the police could arrest him and start the interrogation so they could get a full confession.
Moments after Colin was brought back to homicide, with Detective Baldwin were awaiting his arrival. We just did not have the evidence to put Colin in jail for the rest of his life. The evidence we needed was a confession.
My name is Detective Sergeant Tim Braun. With me is Detective Sam Baldwin. We're both from the Somerset County Major Crime Unit. And we're here today for the purpose of obtaining a voluntary tape statement from Mr. Cullen pertaining to the death of Reverend Florian Gow. We are also here to speak to Mr. Cullen in reference to several other deaths that occurred at Somerset Medical Center and other medical and healthcare facilities.
He was Mirandized and waived his rights and agreed to speak to us.
They were hoping for a full confession, but they weren't really sure what they would get out of him.
The intent was to decrease suffering and evil.
After 16 years of murdering cases across 8 hospitals and staying out of the reach of law enforcement, Charles Cullen has finally been apprehended. However, detectives still need a confession in order to charge him with murder and seek a conviction.
Mr. Cullen, I'm trying to get some detail here to help us as we progress with this investigation.
You know, the charge was attempted to kill anyone. We asked about the murders. He did not admit his acts against his victims.
Charles, could you explain what consists
He's a computerized medication dispensing.
Right.
I'm from Cullen. Doing it to the Pixel system to remove the Johnson. I can't give any specifics about that.
This is your name, right?
This is
Okay. What does this mean?
non-death patients.
And the activity cost doesn't cancel people. But does that all help you in recollection of this event?
At that point, I think it was clear to him that we had enough evidence and that he was not going home. He was going to jail. And he just kind of, in a sense, broke down.
It's okay, it's all right. Don't feel like you have to hold back.
He's ready to talk.
Mr. Cullen, had it been your intention to cause the death of the various patients?
Yes, it was.
confession to Detective Baldwin and I, and he took us on a 7-hour journey through his career. How many patients have you helped to their death? Possibly 30 to 40 patients. Well, 30 to 40 deaths. On that day, he said he killed up to 40 people over 16 years. But it's our strong belief that those numbers were much higher. In fact, in conjunction with the medical records, the legal experts, later on in the investigation, confirmed that the numbers may be well into the hundreds. I just couldn't say. I couldn't stop them. The question that arises out of all of this, Charles, is the why. The intent was to decrease suffering in people I saw throughout my career. I didn't intend for these patients, these people to suffer, and I kept on coming back to that behavior. I thought I could change. But I don't think I was capable of doing that. I couldn't seem to stop trying to do this. It was a dirty, dark secret. I know I have caused suffering for the family members that lived through it. We'll never be certain how many victims there actually were. Colin made a deal with New Jersey prosecutors to spare him the death penalty. He initially said he believed he killed around 40 people, including guilty to 29 murders. Let's talk about the matter pertaining to Florian Gell. Are you responsible for his death? Yes, I am. And why is that, Charlie? Because I injected him with medication called Tehachapi. He agreed to cooperate and identify his victims. At any time, was Christine your patient? No, she was in the room of my patient. Was it your intent when you injected her? Any particular reason why you picked that individual on the